In a few days, we are going to have a serious deep freeze happening here in Montana. Regular winters can be pretty harsh on the horses, and when the temperatures get below zero, these horses need some extra care. Last year, we had a storm with temperatures that were 60 below zero, if you can believe that. My very first video I put on YouTube is actually of that storm, so if you want to check that out, I'll link it in the description. Right now, I do have 3 horses that are over the age of 20. This little guy, Nigel, is the oldest. The vet thought he was somewhere between 30 and 40 years old. I'm just giving him a deep clean. I trimmed his tail so it doesn't get ice balls on it. Since he will be inside for the whole storm, I want to get him as much turnout time as possible before it hits. Although he does really well with just his winter coat in normal Montana winters, they are expecting temperatures up to 50 below zero in this next storm, so I will be putting a blanket on him. I've saved up a bunch of the alfalfa leaves for him to have during the storm as well. He usually gets a mash, but I have a feeling that it's going to freeze before he's able to eat it. Today I am just going to have time to do my regular chores, and then I plan on running into town to get some supplies. I need to pick up some straw, some beet pulp, some alfalfa pellets and cubes. I'm also going to be getting some mineral oil just in case. I am going to feed all of the horses their breakfast and then clean their stalls and then head out for the day. I unfortunately don't make it back until the barn until it's after dark. I do know that I'm going to have a limited amount of time before the storm hits, so I want to get some of these chores done. The nights that are below -30 degrees, I'm going to put a bunch of hay bags out for the horses. They will essentially have a free choice alfalfa. Ideally, I would love to give them some grass hay as well, but it is really hard for me to get. And this alfalfa is pretty thick stem, so it should work pretty well. It's really important to feed these horses additional hay when the temperatures drop so low. The fermentation that happens in their hind gut of the hay is what actually keeps them warm, so I want to make sure they have something to eat at all times. I was able to get 50 bags ready, and that should last me a couple days. Since it is going to be so cold, I am going to be switching out the regular bedding that I use for straw. This straw is in compressed bales. This stuff is a little bit more expensive than regular straw, but it is certified weed-free. I did start the day off with a broken pitchfork, which really bummed me out. I have to strip all the stalls in the barn and then the runs outside as well. Since it is so important that these horses have access to fresh, clean water, I also scrubbed all the tanks really well, and I'm going to make sure that they are full for the storm just in case the faucets stop working. It is actually a very warm day today. It's a little overcast, but it's around 37 degrees. Here is Stewy, and he is the perfect example of a nice thick winter coat. All of the horses that will be staying outside of the barn do have access to a shelter or a windbreak of some kind. Today is the last full day that I can work all day at the barn getting things ready. I started with Nigel's stall. He is kind of a pig, so I ended up stripping everything out. If you've never used compressed hay or straw before, it is amazing how much it fluffs up. Getting it all loosened up is the perfect activity to do if someone has left some hateful comments for you on YouTube recently. I angrily kicked around the blocks of straw for a while and then pulled apart all the flakes just to make sure everything was really fluffed up. This straw works as a much better insulator than shavings would. Just one compressed bale will fill my stalls with about 4 or 5 inches. So far, I am right on track for the day. but it looks like Skeletor is gonna make my job of cleaning out his stall a little bit trickier. He has been on stall rest because of his sore stifle. I tried to take him to the vet the other day, but my trailer was frozen to the ground. So I'll have to take him in after this cold snap is over. Skeletor has the worst stall out of all of the horses. He likes to lay down and roll a lot in his stall, so everything kind of just spreads around. On days when I'm really busy, he insists on me snuggling him more than usual. Tiny was also happy that I was at the barn for a lot longer today. It's not very cold out, but I noticed a little draft and then I saw I had a hole starting in my pants. Luckily, I'm wearing fleece-lined jeans today, so it's not too bad. Skeletor was just being super nosy with everything I was doing today. If I don't have enough time to pet him, he will get really sad and I just can't say no to his sweet face. He is a master manipulator. I really don't mind so much. He's got a huge personality. He was even trying to help me shake apart all of the straw. These compressed bales are a combination of wheat and oat straw, and sometimes there's little bits of grain in them that the horses can eat. I haven't had any trouble with the horses actually eating the straw part of it. All of the horses I have this year, I actually had last year for the big cold snap, so they're used to this straw. I've got a pretty big mound going and I am going to spread it out. I think Skeletor is really excited about this new bedding, and because of his shenanigans, I'm now a little bit behind schedule. I got Studman and Prim's stall cleaned out pretty quickly. One of the best investments that I've had over the last couple years for these cold snaps are these curtains. I don't ever lock the horses in their stalls. They need to be able to get out and move around. They will be eating a ton of hay, so impaction colic is a real concern. The majority of the horses will be staying outside, and this is one of the reasons that horses that share a pasture need to get along very well. All 4 of the horses in this pasture will share this run-in, and they all do go in it at the same time. Stewy was the first one to test out the straw. Goose and Whiplash will get their own run-in shed as well. Whiplash is 20 years old this year, so I'm going to keep an extra close eye on him. I'm just topping off their water and Tiny is supervising me still. She is sticking pretty close to me today. I think she must know that there's a storm coming. I make her up a special straw bed that goes in the tack room, and I usually don't see her when it gets below 0. When I got back in the barn, I noticed that Skeletor was having himself a pretty serious nap. I have just about gotten all of the stalls ready. The last thing I have to do is get Frisco's curtains back up. These are so handy. You can move the strips around if you have a horse that's afraid of them. Each little strip is held on by these brackets, so I'm taking the brackets off and putting some more strips back up. I had these custom made for my stall doors to the outside. I wish I had bought these sooner because it keeps the barn so much warmer. Frisco does have some trouble coming in through them, so I have to leave one open slot for his head. He has used these before and he is pretty old. He'll be 29 this year, but he is still particular about a few things. I gave him a few treats and then I'm gonna move his bowl in for his mash inside and he will eventually just come in. It took me all morning to get the stalls ready. I'm gonna go home and have some lunch. And I was super excited to see that there was a blanket waiting for me that someone had bought off my wish list. It came just in the nick of time. Unfortunately, it did not fit Nigel. I do have a friend that rescues a lot of miniature horses, and she just happened to have one that was exactly his size. Nigel has never worn a blanket before. I was actually a little bit surprised how tolerant he was, especially with the neck cover, but the other horses were terrified of him. I think Frisco Bill was really worried that something had happened to his little pony, so he was really interested in investigating him. Prim was trotting around a little bit as well. After making sure that he was okay, Frisco settled down. It is so funny how these horses can get scared of something as minor as a wardrobe change. One horse who was really terrified was Skeletor. I ended up having to take the blanket off of Nigel and bring it over for Skeletor to investigate. I really thought he was going to jump out of his pen. He was just acting really odd. But after I let him smell the blanket, he seemed to be okay with it. One of the most important things I make for the horses during these sub-zero cold snaps is a special mash. I do not have access to warm water in the barn, so I have to haul it from my house for these guys. These buckets have 3 pounds of beet pulp pellets in it. I've got one more day until the cold snap, so I want to make sure I can soak these in a reasonable amount of time. And this is after an hour, so I'm gonna have to change things up for the next couple days. You can see here how much the beet pulp has puffed up, but this did take 3 hours of soaking, so that's not gonna work for me. It's going to be at least 20 below zero for the next 3 days, and I do not want to be in the barn longer than I have to. In these special mashes, I put the beet pulp, their regular ration balancer, some salt, and I have one picky eater that gets a little bit of senior grain in with it just so they'll eat it. The beet pulp absorbs a lot of water, so this will help the horses stay hydrated. The salt will encourage them to drink, and the beet pulp is mostly fiber, so it will help with the heat from the fermentation that these guys are going to need. All of these horses really like the beet pulp mashes, even though there's not any sugar or anything in it. They gobble it up as soon as I put it out. It is getting down to the wire, so I'm going to make sure that all of the horses' water troughs are filled to the tippy top. This hydrant is one that usually stays thawed out, but I wouldn't be surprised if at -50 a lot of these water hydrants are frozen. The very last thing I have to do for the night before tucking everybody in is catch Nigel, which he does not want to come into his stall. Last year he stayed outside for a snowstorm because I couldn't catch him, and we got like 3 feet of snow, so I want to make sure he's inside and gets his blanket on so he doesn't get too cold. It took me about 5 minutes to catch him, and finally he gave up. For being so old, he still has a lot of sass left in him. I know he would prefer to be outside, but with the temperatures getting so low and him being quite old, I don't think he'll be able to stay warm enough. This is a good example of how their coats insulate them. He actually has some ice chunks on top of his coat, and then it's really fluffy underneath. I'm gonna take him in the barn and get all of this out so I can put his blankets on without him being wet underneath. Skeletor hasn't quite gotten over this sight of Nigel in his blanket, but he can't see in his stall, so it should be fine. Nigel is still a little bit apprehensive about me putting on his blanket. I think this little pony has had kind of a rough life, so he's not used to being spoiled like this. He was a little bit kicky about me putting his leg straps on yesterday, but it seems like he's calmed down a lot since then. I made sure to tuck his mane into his blanket and got him all cozied up for the night. He has a heated water bucket in here, and he will also get his mash twice a day, along with a big pile of just the alfalfa leaves, and that should keep him warm. The only other horse that is going to get a blanket for the cold snap is Frisco Bill. He has been wearing a mid-weight blanket for most of the winter, and for this cold snap I am going to put a liner on underneath. This is just an extra layer of fluff to help combat the super cold temps that we're having. This old guy will be the one that I worry about the most. When we have big swings in temperature, he does seem to be a little bit more sensitive than the other horses. He will get mash and alfalfa leaves just like Nigel. And I'm gonna secure all his blankets with this extra belly band. I'm gonna make sure it's just a little bit loose so his blankets stay fluffy underneath. I think I got it adjusted just right. This first night it's supposed to be 20 to 30 below zero, so all of the horses are going to have access to 40 to 50 pounds of hay apiece. I've tried to prepare everybody as best I can for this really harsh weather we have coming up. I feel confident that I did enough to keep them warm, but I'm sure I'll worry about them for the next couple days until it warms up again. I know there are a few of you guys that have horses in really cold temperatures, and I would love to know if you guys do anything special for them when it gets below zero. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.